This is the Tree of Life, Season 30, Chapter 1. In this episode, we will be talking about the stacking of perceptual experiences in hierarchical recursion and hysteresis. Throughout these podcasts, we have discussed the telescopic effect, which is the idea that every individual exists within a kind of totem pole with their lateral alters. This means that the objects around which they are oriented at any given moment have analogues within the lives of their alters. In 37 families and earlier, we talked about how lateral alters tend to have stacked perceptual experiences, and these tend to be hereditary links. However, in this episode, I would like to elaborate that idea a bit. First, stacked alters need not be related by heredity, but rather, exist in these stacked arrangements by way of hierarchical priority within reverse substitution. These hierarchies can be related by hereditary, but that would tend to occur within the domain of the family, where hierarchical relationships exist usually by consequence of descent. But hierarchical relationships can also form whenever there is a power dynamic to a relationship. Such power dynamics are created when one person meets the expectations of another, expectation matching. Now, in hierarchical recursion, we see that real-life objects can shift when it expands a domain. The idea is that hierarchies may permit recursion, or they may not. When they do not permit recursion, the result is the compelling of acquiescence through nonlinearity, that is, while one's objects of consciousness are disconnected from one's vessel. That is, the compelling of acquiescence takes place by consequence of the stacking of perceptual experiences in the gaps between them. These gaps are created by non-rigidity in a hierarchy, or where there is reversed priority relative to some other hierarchy. That is, these two individuals are interacting within some space by consequence of two or more hierarchies with distinct priority. In this way, nonlinearity is possible as the stacking is of a reversed polarity between these two hierarchies. Now, power dynamics can be introduced in an interaction which can determine the outcome of sequential choices. For example, let's say you are making a meal and you go to take a fork from the dishwasher. You notice that you have pulled out a spoon instead of a fork. You think about it and decide to put the spoon back and take the fork instead. In this case, the first impulse, which results in the spoon, is acquiesced to, resulting in the spoon. The impulse to just use the spoon is negated, then the second impulse, to take the fork follows. Now, let's say you go into the living room to eat your dinner and notice that instead of the fork you still have a spoon. You acquiesce and eat your dinner with a spoon. You must imagine that this is a sequential substitution event, where the first acquiescence leads to the spoon, the negation to the fork, and the final acquiescence to the spoon. Now, as we saw in past episodes, substitution events reveal the stacking of perceptual experiences through hierarchical recursion. This means that during the substitution event, you are disconnected from your objects of consciousness for the duration of the event. Whereas, in reverse substitution, the incoming consciousness acts out the impulse, being the person lower in hierarchy, that is, subject to the power dynamic. Now let's say that you're eating dinner with someone with whom you entertain the possibility of a sexual relationship, which for some reason results in a power dynamic. The spoon has some symbolic importance in a story they tell you during dinner. That is, the fact that you ended up with a spoon by consequence of reverse substitution reflects the orientation of that other to the utensil in a story they wish to tell you. Now, whether this is a glitch, that is, whether you indeed saw a shift from a reality where you took the fork to one in which you were left with a spoon is irrelevant. The important point is that in reverse substitution, through the stacking of perceptual experiences, through the incoming consciousness acting out the impulse, you have seen that the utensil, which has salience to the other within that power dynamic, is the one you ended up with. Objects tied to choices are linked to particular flows of consciousness. In sequential substitution, we see the acquiesced to impulse negated at the conclusion of reverse substitution, but in the following substitution event, we see that negation become acquiescence. The preference of path is determined in reference to the salience of the object with respect to the incoming consciousness. Procedurally, we see the sequential substitution event as resulting in a return to the original digital structure, rather than what we see in preference shifting, as the shift from one digital structure to another through tautological infinite recursion. But just the same, as the objects within your action have analogues within the lives of another, so too do the objects in their mind have an analogue in yours. In the stacking of perceptual experiences caused by a power dynamic, we see an interplay between the objects relevant to you and the objects relevant to them. In tautological infinite recursion, in the shifting of digital objects on some medium, we see tautological hysteresis. In the example above, we see hierarchical hysteresis. That is, there is a dynamic lag between the input provided, acquiescence or negation, and the output, the result of that option. Hysteresis is a symptom of nonlinearity. It reveals the existence of other paths that aren't incorporated into the memory of a person, although they become part of the history. That's the end of the podcast for today.